Welcome to the third video in this mini-series on how to train around injuries. So today we're going to be looking at shoulder injuries. This one's a little bit more complicated, so I'm going to be using just a generalized shoulder injury and trying to avoid that area or exacerbating the issue. So like I've said in the previous episodes, we're not going to be looking at rehabbing or improving that specific injury. What we're going to be focusing on is how to train around it, focusing on making sure you keep your finger strength up, your climbing movements, and doing any sort of conditioning around the area. If you do want any more specific advice or you're unsure about whether this is appropriate for you, I really recommend seeing a medical professional in person and getting a consultation with them. I'm not a medical professional and every injury is completely unique to the person, so it's really worth going and getting it checked out if you're unsure. So like I said in the other episodes as well, I hope you're going to be focusing on using a scoring system to monitor how well your injury is improving. By doing that, we're going to be focusing on a 1 to 10 scale of pain and discomfort in training and a 1 to 10 scale on the reaction to the training the next morning. So 1 being pain-free, 10 being extremely painful, and 1 being no reaction in the morning, no stiffness or swelling or pain, and 10 being the absolute opposite, so it's reacted really badly. Training finger strength whilst you've got a shoulder injury can be a frustrating process if you feel uncomfortable in the hanging positions or the positions that you're lifting weights. But there are a couple of things you need to keep in mind. This bit's generally simple compared to elbow or finger injuries, but it's still worth taking note of. So one, the easiest way to protect your shoulders whilst doing finger strength training is, sound like a broken record here, but get a edge or pinch block. The reason for that is if you're lifting up in this position here, your shoulders don't have to go overhead. You can just stay in a nice engaged position, shoulders back, and you can keep it completely static. There's no sort of movement throughout this exercise. So lifting weights, doing the same sort of max hangs or protocols, but using an edge instead is a really good way to improve that and make your ability to train fingers much better. However, if you're using a fingerboard, so we'll class the pull-up bar as a fingerboard. The things I think to keep in mind is to try and avoid any sort of movement around the shoulders during the hang. So you want to be able to load up nice and slowly and really slowly bring your feet off the ground. If you're starting to like jolt into position, then that's going to be what's starting to make the shoulder much more aggravated. Another thing to keep in mind is doing repetitions of that movement. So the more time hanging is going to be worse, and the more time using your shoulders. So if I'm doing repeaters where I'm hanging and then off the bar and then hanging, then that's going to add a lot more strain than just doing a max hang, which will be for 10 seconds at a time. A couple more things if hanging from a fingerboard, pull-up bar being the fingerboard, is you need to think about your shoulder positioning. So a lot of issues with shoulders tend to come when the angle here to your collarbone is really acute. So if I'm in a really engaged position here, or if my hands feel quite narrow together if I've got hanging from pockets or something. So a couple of options to do is to find the position which is more comfortable for the shoulders. So that could be, instead of really high, could be somewhere slightly lower or even slightly more disengaged than you normally do. Once again, hanging nice and slowly. Or it could be actually hanging on one arm, which sounds a bit weird considering you've got a shoulder issue, but it can sometimes help. The reason for that is if you've got a support here with the other hand, it could be a door frame, it could be a pulley. You can open up the shoulders a bit more and then hang in a position that's more comfortable for them. So the key things there are just to make sure that the shoulders are comfortable. The specific type of climbing that you want to do around a shoulder injury is going to be very dependent on the shoulder injury itself, but there's a couple of rules that I tend to keep in mind irregardless, and this usually covers most grounds. So one of them is the size of box that you're going to be climbing in. So you might have heard this in the past where climbers talk about their box or I'm good in this size box, or you've got a much bigger box than me. And the idea of that is the amount of area around your body that you are strong in. So a smaller box is sort of a smaller area, and that might mean all the handholds and the positions in that box are going to be a lot closer to the body. If you're doing wider box moves, that's going to be your hands are further away. For shoulders, we want to try and stay in a more narrow box position because it's going to put less leverage on our shoulders themselves. So some good examples of that is if you're doing any sort of bouldering or endurance climbing, you're really reaching out above your head, then that's going to be really extending that size of the box, and that's going to put a lot of leverage on that shoulder. So we're trying to avoid that situation. Some good training tips for staying within the box and movements that are great for shoulder injuries are doing undercuts, where the undercuts are around your shoulder height or below, because it's going to be mostly working the biceps. Your shoulder's going to stay steady and you're not going to be really pulling in out in an extended position. Doing Gastons can actually be quite good as long as it's in a good small box size as well. So rather than being really wide out to the side, if you're doing Gastons in a controlled manner close to the body, that can be a good way to build up strength in that shoulder without putting too much leverage through it. The next thing with shoulders is making sure that you're not doing anything too dynamic or slappy once again. This is where you can have really, really bad instances of injury, where you've already got a slight shoulder injury and then you do something really slappy, which can make that shoulder much worse. A rest, if you're not just focusing on balance, can actually be quite dynamic and slappy, which can actually make your shoulder really badly if it's steep. So if you're going to do any erect climbing, make sure that it's really vertical. And like with the elbow issues that we discussed in the previous episode, trying to focus on that balance point rather than slapping your way up and erect with a lot of power. So focusing on that balance is another good tip for working around a shoulder injury. So the last thing that I think is particularly good for shoulder injuries is focusing on the type of movements which allow you to keep relatively straight arms and in front of the body. So this can be working over an overhang and heel hooking your way up, so along a lip. I think that can be quite good for the shoulders as long as you're not trying to go around the lip itself. And also crack climbing can actually be quite good sometimes for your shoulders, as long as it's not too aggressive. Just working nice, easy jamming positions, because you can keep it in front of the body, and as long as you're not torquing your shoulders too much and trying to do any advanced techniques and you're just working on your jamming that you might find at a local commercial wall or an easy climbing venue, then that can be a really good use of time, which is going to put a lot of work into the technical elements of crack climbing, but without stressing the shoulders too much. That doesn't mean that roof cracks are a good idea though, so you need to have a think about that one before you get started. If the hands are in front of the body in this small box, it's a good idea. If you're reaching high above your head, it's probably not a good idea. So the main things to consider when you're doing any sort of conditioning and trying to get stronger with a shoulder injury is to 1, think about the shoulder position, and then 2, the load going through that shoulder. So most shoulder injuries that we come up with as climbers is going to be related to doing overhead work. So climbing with your hands above your head, hanging from the bar, or doing any sort of movements where your shoulder's going to be in this position. So a lot of the conditioning you can do could be doing below your shoulders and making sure that you're lifting weights and keeping your shoulders in a nice, stable, open position. So easy examples, instead of doing pull-ups, we could do curls, any sort of curling exercise, because your shoulder's staying stable and you're going to be working, even though it's stabilizing, the arm's going to be working just as hard but below that shoulder. You can do any sort of barbell exercise, such as deadlifts or rack pulls, because once again, your shoulder's going to be staying in the same position and you're going to be moving, holding the bar below your waist. So I'd really recommend starting to do that for any sort of body tension work. The things I would not do are sort of pulling exercises with your arms close together. And depending on the injury, it could be more comfortable to go wider or it could be more painful. So any sort of pull-up exercise, you're going to be trying to save that overarm time for the climbing. So trying to keep your arms above your head only when you're climbing will reduce that amount of time and mean that you're going to get much, much better. For pushing movements, you're going to be looking at the amount of load going through the shoulders. And that's once again related to how much above your head it's going to be. So for an example, in a bench press, an incline press up means that your arms are going to be going more upwards And a decline bench press is going to be going more downwards. The more downward your arms are going, the more it's going to be involved around your chest and your arms rather than on the front of your shoulders and your deltoids. Press ups, it's actually switching the other way around. And if you're doing an incline press up, so your shoulders higher than your feet, that's going to be a lot better than doing decline press ups where your feet are higher than your shoulders. It's always hard to get that one the right way around. So thanks for watching another episode on how to train around injuries. I hope you've got a load more information on how to train around shoulder injuries. And like I said at the start, this one is quite complicated and there can be loads of different things to keep in mind, but hopefully that gives you a little bit more information on how I would advise someone to stay strong and keep climbing movement up despite having such a debilitating injury. Just make sure that you stay motivated and keep it up through the rehab phase, because you can come out better and stronger if you're careful and you don't make it worse, but you also take the time to go and get this training done. So we've got one more episode coming up next, which will be the working around knee injuries, and I think it's a really good one that is always overlooked. And if you haven't already seen it, we've covered how to train around finger injuries and elbow injuries as well. So if you've enjoyed this, please make sure to subscribe to the channel and I'll see you very soon.